Captain Jake Morrison walked across the bridge of his ship, the UES Liberty. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the gentle beeping of monitors. Outside the large windows, stars dotted the black space like tiny diamonds. Jake had been a captain for 12 years, and he still loved looking at the stars. It was just another normal day in space. The Liberty was on patrol duty near the outer edge of human territory. Jake's crew was checking trade routes and making sure pirates weren't bothering merchant ships. It was peaceful work, and Jake liked it that way. He had seen enough war in his younger days. Jake was tall, with gray hair at his temples. His blue uniform was clean and pressed, just like regulations required. At 52 years old, he was one of the older captains in the fleet. The younger officers respected him because he always stayed calm under pressure. Dr. Lisa Harper sat at the communication station. She was 34 years old with short brown hair and smart green eyes. Lisa had joined Jake's crew 3 years ago, and she was the best communications officer he had ever worked with. She could decode messages faster than anyone in the fleet. "Captain," Lisa called out, looking up from her console, "I'm getting something strange on the long-range sensors." Jake walked over to her station. "What kind of strange?" "It's a transmission, but it's really weak. It's coming from way out there." Lisa pointed to her screen where a small red dot was blinking. "The signal is bouncing around a lot. Someone is trying very hard to get this message out." Jake frowned. The red dot was in the Cathari system, which was far from human space. The Cathari were a peaceful species that lived in the oceans of their world. They were known throughout the galaxy for being kind and helpful. They made the best medicine in known space and never bothered anyone. "Can you clean up the signal?" Jake asked. Lisa's fingers moved quickly over her keyboard. "I'm trying, Captain, but whoever sent this is using old encryption. It's going to take some time." Commander Alex Chen walked up to them. Alex was Jake's second in command, a serious man with black hair and dark eyes. He was only 38, but already one of the smartest officers in the human fleet. Alex had grown up on Mars and joined the military when he turned 18. "What do we have?" Alex asked, looking at Lisa's screen. "Possible distress call from the Cathari system," Jake replied. "Lisa is working on cleaning it up." Alex's face grew worried. "The Cathari? They never send distress calls. They don't even have a real military." Jake nodded. The Cathari were famous for being peaceful. They spent their time studying medicine and philosophy. Their cities were built underwater in their planet's vast oceans. They had never been in a war as far as anyone knew. 20 minutes later, Lisa looked up with a pale face. "Captain, you need to hear this." Jake pressed a button and a voice filled the bridge. The voice was speaking in the Cathari language, but the ship's computer translated it into English. The translated voice sounded scared and desperate. "This is Elder Nylith of the Cathari High Council. Our world is under attack. The Vorthak Empire has invaded our system. They are destroying our cities. We have no weapons to fight them. Please, anyone who receives this message, we need help. We are dying." The bridge went silent. Everyone stared at the speakers as if they couldn't believe what they had heard. Jake felt his stomach drop. The Vorthak Empire was bad news. They were a military race that conquered other planets for fun. They were known for being cruel and never showing mercy. If the Vorthak were attacking the Cathari, it meant they planned to wipe them out completely. "Get me more information," Jake ordered. "Lisa, see if there are any other messages. Alex, contact our intelligence network. I want to know everything about what's happening in that system." Lisa worked at her station while Alex used the long-range communications array. Other crew members on the bridge moved with new urgency. Everyone knew the Cathari were good people who didn't deserve to be attacked. 10 minutes later, Alex walked back to Jake with a grim expression. "Captain, it's worse than we thought. Our deep space monitoring stations have been tracking Vorthak ship movements for the past week. They didn't just attack the Cathari homeworld, they also hit 2 Cathari colony planets." "What happened to the colonies?" Jake asked, though he already feared the answer. "Gone," Alex replied quietly. "The Vorthak used planet cracker weapons. They boiled the oceans and turned the planets into dead rocks. No survivors. Jake closed his eyes for a moment. Planet crackers were weapons that could destroy entire worlds. The Vorthak were not just conquering the Cathari, they were committing genocide. Lisa looked up from her station again. "Captain, I found another message. This one is newer." The second message was clearer, but the desperation in the Cathari voice was even stronger. "This is Elder Nalith. If anyone receives this, please know that we tried to contact the Galactic powers for help. The Alterian Republic says they cannot get involved due to political issues. The Zephyrian Collective claims they do not have enough ships to help us. No one will come. We have maybe 3 days before our homeworld falls. Our children are dying. Please, someone help us." Jake felt anger building in his chest. The Alterian Republic was one of the most powerful governments in the galaxy. They had thousands of ships and could easily stop the Vorthak if they wanted to. The Zephyrian Collective was almost as strong. But they were both too worried about politics to save innocent people. "Sir," said Lieutenant Danny Rogers, who was working at the sensor station. Danny was young, only 25, with red hair and freckles. He had grown up on Earth and still got homesick sometimes. "I'm detecting more Vorthak ships moving toward the Cathari system. It looks like they're bringing in their main battle fleet." Jake walked to the main view screen and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire species was about to be wiped out, and the galaxy's major powers were doing nothing to stop it. "Captain," Alex said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Jake thought about his options. The Liberty was just one ship, with a crew of 300 people. The Vorthak had hundreds of ships and thousands of soldiers. It would be suicide to attack them alone. But Jake also thought about the Cathari. He had met some of them during diplomatic missions. They were gentle beings who lived in harmony with their ocean world. They had given humanity medical knowledge that had saved millions of human lives. They had never hurt anyone. "Lisa," Jake said, "send a message to Earth Fleet Command. Tell them what we've learned, and send a copy to every human ship and colony in this sector." "Yes, sir," Lisa replied, her fingers already moving over her keyboard. Jake walked back to his command chair and sat down. He looked around at his crew. These were good people who had signed up to protect the innocent and defend those who couldn't defend themselves. "Alex," he said, "plot a course for Earth. Maximum speed." "Sir?" Alex looked confused. "Are we abandoning the Cathari?" Jake smiled, grimly. "No, Commander, we're going to get help. If the galaxy's major powers won't save the Cathari, then maybe it's time for humanity to show them how it's done." As the Liberty turned toward Earth, Jake wondered if they would be fast enough. The Cathari had maybe 3 days left. It would take everything humanity had to mount a rescue mission in time. But Jake knew one thing for certain. Humanity had never turned its back on innocent people in need, and they weren't going to start now. The news spread through human space like wildfire. Every communication channel carried the story of the Cathari's desperate plea for help. On Earth, on Mars, on the colony worlds scattered across dozens of star systems, people watched the translated messages from Elder Nalith with growing anger. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of the orbital defense platform above Earth. She was 55 years old with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her gray eyes were sharp and intelligent. Kate had commanded fleets for 20 years, and she had never seen anything like what was happening now. The main screen in the command center showed a map of the galaxy. Red dots marked Vorthak positions, while blue dots showed human ships. The red dots outnumbered the blue ones by 50 to 1. Any military academy would say this was an impossible fight. "Admiral," said Captain Betty Lewis, Kate's aide. Betty was a young officer with blonde hair and determined brown eyes. She had graduated at the top of her class from the Naval Academy. "The Defense Council is ready for the emergency meeting." Kate nodded and walked to the conference room. Inside, the most powerful people in human space were gathering via holographic projection. These were the leaders who would decide if humanity would fight or do nothing like the other galactic powers. President Linda Foster appeared first. She, was the elected leader of the United Earth Coalition, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a firm voice. She had been a teacher before entering politics, and she still believed in doing what was right rather than what was easy. General Ryan. Murphy's hologram materialized next. Ryan commanded the Colonial Marines, the toughest soldiers in human space. He was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands from his younger fighting days. Ryan had grown up poor on a mining colony and worked his way up through the ranks. Dr. Helen Barnes joined the meeting from the Medical Research Station on Europa. She was humanity's top expert on alien biology and had worked with the Cathari before. Helen was in her 40s with curly red hair and glasses that made her look younger than she was. "Ladies and gentlemen," President Foster began, "we all know why we're here. The Cathari are facing complete extinction, and the major galactic powers refuse to help them." Admiral Sullivan pulled up the intelligence reports on her screen. "According to our deep space monitors, the Vorthak have already destroyed 2 Cathari colony worlds. They're using planet cracker weapons to boil the oceans and turn the planets into dead rock. This isn't conquest. This is genocide." General Murphy leaned forward in his chair. His face was red with anger. "The Cathari saved my daughter's life 10 years ago. Their medicine cured a disease that would have killed her. Now they're dying, and the galaxy just watches." Dr. Barnes spoke up. "I've worked with Cathari scientists for years. They're the gentlest people I've ever met. They don't even understand the concept of war. Their language doesn't have a word for murder." President Foster looked around the table at each person. "The Altarian Republic has 5,000 ships in their fleet. The Zephyrian Collective has 3,000. Either one of them could stop the Vorthak easily, but they won't. Because they're cowards," General Murphy growled. "They're worried about their trade deals and their political agreements. They'd rather let innocent people die than risk a fight." Admiral Sullivan brought up another display. "Our total fleet strength is 800 ships. Most of them are patrol vessels and cargo haulers. We have maybe 200 real warships. The Vorthak have brought their 5th battle fleet to the Cathari system. That's over 1,000 ships, including their newest dreadnoughts." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what those numbers meant. Humanity would be fighting an enemy with 5 times their strength and better technology. Dr. Barnes cleared her throat. "There's something else. The Cathari are aquatic. They need to live in water. Even if we could evacuate them, we'd need to convert our ships to carry millions of gallons of ocean water. The engineering challenges alone would be enormous." Captain Betty Lewis, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. "Admiral, I've been monitoring communications from across human space. Military bases, civilian ships, even merchant vessels are volunteering to join a rescue mission. The response is unlike anything I've ever seen." President Foster leaned back in her chair. She had been quiet for several minutes, thinking about the decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "General Murphy, how long would it take to mobilize our forces? If we're talking about every ship we can get our hands on, maybe 18 hours, but ma'am, this would be everything we have. If we lose this fight, Earth would be defenseless." Admiral Sullivan nodded grimly. "The Vorthak would see our weakness. They might decide to come after us next." "Let them come," President Foster said quietly. "If we let the Cathari die when we could have helped them, what kind of people does that make us?" Dr. Barnes pulled up images of Cathari families on her screen. The aquatic beings were beautiful in their own way, with smooth blue-green skin and large, intelligent eyes. "These are the people we're talking about saving. Look at them. They're parents and children, teachers and artists, just like us." "General," Murphy stood up from his chair. "Ma'am, I've been a soldier for 30 years. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing while evil spreads. The Vorthak won't stop with the Cathari. They'll keep conquering and killing until someone makes them stop." President Foster looked at Admiral Sullivan. "Kate, give me your honest assessment. Can we win this fight?" Admiral Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. "Under normal circumstances, no. The Vorthak have superior numbers and technology, but they're not fighting humans under normal circumstances. They're fighting humans who are angry." "What do you mean?" President Foster asked. "The Vorthak have conquered dozens of worlds, but they've always faced enemies who fought for territory or resources or political power. They've never faced an enemy fighting to save innocent strangers. They don't understand that kind of motivation. Captain Lewis spoke up again. Admiral, I'm getting reports from across the fleet. Ship captains are requesting permission to join the rescue mission. Some are already moving toward the assembly point without orders. President Foster smiled for the first time in the meeting. That sounds like humanity to me. We've always been the species that rushes toward danger when someone needs help. General, Murphy sat back down. Ma'am, if we're doing this, we need to do it right. This won't be a traditional battle. We'll be outgunned and outnumbered. We'll need to use every trick we know and some we haven't invented yet. Dr. Barnes nodded. And we'll need to be ready to evacuate millions of Cathari civilians while we're fighting. Our ships will need to be hospitals, refugee centers, and warships all at the same time. Admiral Sullivan pulled up star charts showing the route to the Cathari system. The journey will take us through 3 different sectors. Word will get out about what we're doing. The whole galaxy will be watching. Good, President Foster said firmly. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when humanity decides to care about something. The president stood up and everyone else followed. I am authorizing the largest military mobilization in human history. Every ship, every soldier, every resource we can spare goes towards saving the Cathari. General Murphy saluted. It will be an honor to serve, ma'am. Admiral Sullivan nodded. We'll show the galaxy what human fury looks like when innocent people are threatened. As the meeting ended and the holograms faded away, President Foster remained standing alone in the conference room. Through the large windows, she could see Earth turning slowly below. Soon, humanity's children would leave the safety of their home worlds to fight impossible odds for people they had never met. She thought about her own children, safe in their schools on Earth. She thought about the Cathari children, hiding in underwater cities while death approached from space. The choice was easy when she looked at it that way. Humanity had always been the species that answered when someone called for help. Today would be no different, no matter what the cost. The space around Jupiter had never seen so many ships in one place. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Defiance, and watched as vessels from across human space continued to arrive. Battlecruisers from Mars came, alongside cargo haulers from the outer colonies. Military transport shared space with civilian ships that had been hastily converted for war. In less than 20 hours, humanity had assembled the largest fleet in its history. 812 ships of every size and type floated in formation near Jupiter's largest moon. Some were massive dreadnoughts with enough firepower to level a city. Others were small patrol boats with crews of only 10 people. But every single ship had volunteered to fight. Captain Tony Rodriguez piloted his reconnaissance ship, the UES Falcon, through the fleet formation. Tony was 32 years old with black hair and brown eyes. He had grown up on a space station and knew how to fly before he could drive a car. His job was to scout ahead and gather intelligence about the enemy. Admiral, Tony's voice came through the communication system. I'm seeing ships I didn't even know we had. There's a mining vessel from the asteroid belt that's been fitted with missile launchers. Admiral Sullivan smiled grimly. That would be Captain Pete Morgan and his crew. They hauled rocks for 15 years before this. Now they're hauling something else. The bridge crew of the Defiance worked with quiet efficiency. Everyone knew they were about to attempt something that military experts said was impossible, but no one seemed worried. If anything, the crew seemed eager to get moving. Commander Alex Chen had transferred from Captain Morrison's ship to serve as Admiral Sullivan's tactical officer. Alex studied the fleet composition on his screen and shook, his head in amazement. Admiral, we have ships from 12 different colonies and 6 different military branches. This shouldn't work at all. But it will, Admiral Sullivan replied. Do you know why? Alex looked up from his screen. No, ma'am. Because every person in this fleet knows exactly why they're here. We're not fighting for territory or politics, or trade agreements. We're fighting because someone asked for help and we said yes. Meanwhile, deep in the engineering sections of dozens of ships, teams worked around the clock to solve an impossible problem. The Cathari were aquatic beings who needed ocean water to survive. Rescuing them meant converting cargo holds into temporary seas. Engineer Maya Foster led one of these teams aboard the transport ship UES Haven. Maya was 28 years old, with red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had never worked with alien life support systems before, but she was learning fast. "We need to flood Cargo Bay 7 with seawater," Maya told her team. "But we also need to make sure the water can be cleaned and refreshed. The Cathari will be stuck in there for days." Her assistant, a young man named Carl Davis, looked worried. "Maya, we're talking about carrying millions of gallons of water. That's going to affect our speed and maneuverability." Maya wiped sweat from her forehead. "Then we'll just have to be creative. War makes engineers out of all of us." Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. Ship after ship was being modified to carry Cathari refugees. Medical bays were being expanded. Food processors were being reprogrammed to create the algae-based nutrition that Cathari needed to survive. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Davis commanded the Marine units that would handle ground operations. Frank was 45 years old with gray hair and serious blue eyes. He had fought in 3 different conflicts and earned medals for bravery. But he had never faced an enemy like the Vorthak. Frank stood in the briefing room of the assault ship, U.S. Storm, looking at intelligence photos of Vorthak soldiers. The aliens were 12 feet tall with natural armor that looked like black metal. Their arms ended in claws that could cut through steel. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but reports said they had rows of sharp teeth. "Marines," Frank addressed. His troops, "I won't lie to you. The Vorthak are bigger than us, stronger than us, and better armed than us. But they have one weakness." A young Marine named Bobby Clark raised his hand. Bobby was 19 years old and had never been in real combat before. "What's their weakness, sir?" Frank smiled. "They don't know what they're fighting. They think we're like every other species they've conquered. They think we'll run when things get tough. They're about to learn they're wrong." Dr. Susan Blake worked in the medical bay of the hospital ship UES Mercy. Susan was 41 years old with brown hair and gentle hands that had saved countless lives. She was humanity's leading expert on Cathari biology, and her knowledge would be crucial for the rescue operation. "The Cathari breathe dissolved oxygen from water," Susan explained to her medical team. "If their gills dry out, they die in minutes. We need to be ready to treat injuries while keeping them completely submerged." Her assistant, Dr. Nancy Green, looked concerned. "Susan, what if we can't save them all?" Susan looked up from her medical scanner. "Then we save as many as we can, but we don't give up on anyone." Captain Morrison's ship, the UES Liberty, had been repaired and fitted with extra weapons. Morrison himself stood on his bridge, looking out at the assembled fleet. His crew had been through battles before, but never anything like this. "Captain," said Communications Officer Lisa Harper, "I'm receiving final status reports from all ships in the fleet. Everyone is reporting ready for departure." Morrison nodded. "Send a message to Admiral Sullivan. Tell her the Liberty is ready to do her part." As the final preparations continued, more intelligence reports came in from the Cathari system. The situation was getting worse by the hour. Captain Rodriguez returned from another scouting mission with grim news. "Admiral," Tony reported to Admiral Sullivan, "the Vorthak have deployed planet cracker weapons in orbit around the Cathari homeworld. They're not just planning to conquer the planet, they're planning to destroy it completely." Admiral Sullivan felt her jaw tighten with anger. Planet crackers were weapons designed to break apart entire worlds. They would boil the Cathari oceans and turn the planet into lifeless rock, just like they had done to the 2 colony worlds. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Maybe 18 hours before they start the final bombardment. After that, every Cathari on the planet will be dead." The Admiral looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. These were good people who had families back on Earth. They were about to risk everything for strangers they had never met, but none of them looked afraid. "Communications," Admiral Sullivan ordered. "Send a message to the entire fleet. All ships are to prepare for immediate departure." The message went out across 800 ships. In engine rooms, crews brought reactors to full power. In weapons bays, gunners loaded missiles and charged energy cannons. In the modified cargo holds, pumps began filling tanks with seawater for the Cathari refugees they hoped to save. Admiral Sullivan stood at the center of her bridge and looked out at the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Ships that had never worked together were about to fight side by side. Crews that came from different worlds and different backgrounds were united by a single purpose. All ships, the Admiral announced over the fleet communication channel. This is Admiral Sullivan. In a few minutes we will depart for the Cathari system. We are outnumbered 5-1. We are outgunned by enemies with better technology. Military experts say this mission is impossible. She paused, looking around at her crew. Everyone was listening intently. But we are not fighting for military experts. We are fighting for people who asked for help when no one else would listen. We are fighting because it is the right thing to do. Today, the galaxy will learn what happens when humanity decides to care. The fleet began to move. 800 ships turned away from Jupiter and pointed toward the stars. Their destination was 18 hours away at maximum speed. Waiting for them was an enemy that had never been defeated and had never shown mercy. But humanity was coming, anyway, carrying the fury of an entire species that refused to let innocent people die alone. The battle raged for 16 hours before the last Vorthak ship either fled the system or was destroyed. When the shooting finally stopped, Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on what remained of her bridge and looked out at a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Floating in the dark space around Cathari Prime were the broken remains of 63 human ships. The UES Liberty, Captain Morrison's proud vessel, was among the dead hulks drifting silently through the void. Morrison himself had died when his ship's reactor exploded, taking the Vorthak flagship with it in a final act of defiance. Admiral Sullivan felt tears running down her cheeks, but she also felt something else. Pride. Her people had done the impossible. They had defeated an enemy 3 times their size and saved an entire civilization from extinction. "Admiral," said Commander Alex Chen, his voice hoarse from 16 hours of continuous battle, "we're receiving final evacuation reports from all surviving ships." Sullivan wiped her eyes and turned to face her tactical officer. "What's our count, Alex?" Alex looked down at his damaged console, where the numbers glowed softly in the dim light of the ruined bridge. 4,200,000 Cathari civilians rescued and aboard our ships. Dr. Blake estimates we saved about 80% of their total population. 4 million lives. The number was almost too big to understand. Each one represented a family saved, a child who would grow up, a teacher who would continue to pass on knowledge, an artist who would create beauty in the universe. Elder Nalith's voice came through the communication system from one of the evacuation ships. The old Cathari leader was weak and exhausted, but his words carried a strength that filled every human who heard them. "People of Earth," Elder Nalith said, his translated voice filled with emotion. "My people have no words in our language for what you have done. You came to save strangers when no one else would help. You bled for us when we were nothing to you. We will remember this forever." On the hospital ship UES Mercy, Dr. Susan Blake worked to save the last of the wounded Cathari. Her medical bay was filled with the rescued civilians, some floating peacefully in the water-filled treatment rooms, others still fighting for their lives. A young Cathari named Scylla, barely more than a child, looked up at Dr. Blake with large, wondering eyes. Scylla had been badly injured when a Vorthak energy beam hit her school, but the human doctors had saved her life. "Why did you come for us?" Scylla asked in broken English that she had learned from the ship's translation computer. Dr. Blake knelt beside the water tank where Scylla was recovering. "Because someone asked for help, and we couldn't say no." "But we are not your people," Scylla said, confusion clear in her voice. Susan smiled gently. "No, but you needed help. That makes you our people." The evacuation fleet began the long journey back to human space. The rescued Cathari would be taken to a new world that humanity had prepared for them. It was an ocean planet with vast seas and coral reefs, similar to their lost homeworld but far from any threat. Captain Tony Rodriguez, flying escort duty in his battered scout ship, sent regular reports back to the fleet. His voice was tired, but filled with amazement at what they had accomplished. "Admiral, I'm detecting no pursuit from any remaining Vorthak forces. It looks like we're clear for the journey home. Admiral Sullivan nodded from her temporary command center. The bridge of the Defiance had been too badly damaged to use, so she was commanding the fleet from a converted cargo hold. Good work, Tony. How are our passengers doing? Dr. Blake reports all Cathari refugees are stable for the journey. The conversion of our cargo holds into temporary oceans is working better than expected. Engineer Maya Foster had become something of a hero among the Cathari refugees. Her modifications to the human ships had created livable environments for the aquatic beings. Maya worked around the clock, moving from ship to ship to ensure the life support systems continued to function properly. The water temperature in Cargo Bay 7 needs to be adjusted, Maya reported to the engineering team aboard the transport UES Haven. The Cathari children need it slightly warmer than the adults. Her assistant Carl Davis looked exhausted, but determined. Maya, you've been working for 20 straight hours. You need to rest. Maya shook her head as she continued adjusting the environmental controls. I'll rest when we get these people to their new home. Right now, 4 million lives depend on these systems working perfectly. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Davis sat with his Marines in the mess hall of the assault ship UES Storm. Many of the tough soldiers had tears in their eyes as they talked about what they had seen during the evacuation. I carried a Cathari grandmother who was over 200 years old, said Marine Bobby Clark. She had never seen violence in her entire life until the Vorthak came. She kept thanking me in her language, even though I couldn't understand the words. Sergeant Linda White, a veteran of 3 previous conflicts, wiped her eyes. I've been a Marine for 15 years, and I've never been part of something like this. We didn't just win a battle, we saved the entire species. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy, faster than the returning fleet could travel. On dozens of worlds, representatives of alien governments watched the footage of human ships attacking impossible odds to save strangers. The Galactic community was stunned into silence. The Altarian Republic, which had refused to help the Cathari, suddenly found their trade agreements being cancelled by species who had watched humanity's sacrifice. The Zephyrian Collective faced protests from their own people, who demanded to know why they had not acted when innocents were dying. President Linda Foster received messages from over 30 different alien governments, all requesting meetings with human representatives. Species that had never considered humans to be important suddenly wanted to form alliances and trade agreements. But the most important message came from the Cathari themselves. Elder Nalith, speaking for all the survivors, made a formal declaration that was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. The human species has proven that there is still honor in the universe, the old Cathari said. They risked everything to save people they had never met. From this day forward, the Cathari pledge ourselves as allies and friends to humanity forever. The journey back to human space took 2 weeks. When the evacuation fleet finally arrived at the Cathari's new homeworld, Admiral Sullivan stood on the observation deck and watched as millions of aquatic beings saw their new oceans for the first time. The planet was beautiful, with crystal-clear seas and abundant marine life. Human terraforming teams had worked for months to make it perfect for the Cathari refugees. It would never replace their lost homeworld, but it offered hope for the future. Elder Nalith, now recovered enough to swim freely, met with Admiral Sullivan in an underwater chamber that had been built specifically for human Cathari meetings. The old leader looked much better now that he was in clean, healthy water again. Admiral Sullivan, Elder Nalith said through the translation system, "My people want to give you something." The elder gestured, and several young Cathari swam forward carrying a beautiful sculpture made from the coral of their lost homeworld. It depicted a human figure reaching out to help an aquatic being, symbolizing the rescue that had saved their species. "This is the first monument we have created on our new world," Elder Nalith explained. "It will remind future generations that, when all hope was lost, humanity answered our call." Admiral Sullivan accepted the sculpture with shaking hands. The weight of it seemed to represent all the human lives that had been lost to save these people. 63 ships and over 12,000 human service members had died far from home for beings they had never met. Elder Nalith, Admiral Sullivan, said, "We didn't do this for monuments or gratitude. We did it because it was right." The old Cathari smiled, an expression that translated easily across species. "That, Admiral, is exactly why you did it. And that is why the galaxy will never forget what humanity is capable of when innocent people need help." As Admiral Sullivan prepared to return to Earth, she looked back at the new Cathari homeworld one last time. In the distance, she could see human and Cathari engineers working together to build new cities beneath the waves. Children of both species played in the shallows, learning each other's languages and customs. The galaxy had learned something important from the Battle of Cathari Prime. When evil threatened the innocent, humanity would answer the call, no matter the cost. And that knowledge would change everything. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Cathari system exactly 18 hours after leaving Jupiter. What they found waiting for them was worse than their worst fears. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and stared at the tactical display. The Vorthak 5th Battle Fleet was spread across the system like a dark cloud. Over 1,000 enemy ships surrounded the blue-green world that was the Cathari homeworld. Massive planet-cracker weapons hung in orbit, their energy collectors, already, glowing with deadly power. "My God," whispered Commander Alex Chen as he studied the sensor readings. "They have 3 times more ships than our intelligence reported." The Cathari homeworld itself showed the terrible damage of the ongoing attack. Once beautiful ocean cities were burning beneath the waves. Entire continents had been turned into steaming wastelands. The planet's famous crystal blue oceans were now dark with smoke and debris. Captain Tony Rodriguez flew his scout ship, the UES Falcon, closer to get a better look at the enemy formation. His voice came through the communication system with barely controlled anger. "Admiral, they're not just attacking military targets. They're hitting schools, hospitals, refugee centers. This isn't war, it's murder." On the surface of the dying world, the Cathari people huddled in their underwater cities, waiting for death. Elder Nalith, the leader who had sent the desperate plea for help, stood in the central chamber of the capital city. Water flowed around him, but it was no longer the clean, life-giving ocean he had known all his life. It was polluted with the ashes of his people. "Elder," said one of his advisors, a young Cathari named Veth, "our sensors show new ships entering the system, but they are not Vorthak vessels." Nalith felt his heart skip a beat. The Cathari had 2 hearts, and both of them were racing with desperate hope. "Show me." The holographic display showed 800 ships in formation at the edge of the system. They were smaller than the Vorthak vessels, and they looked different. The design was unfamiliar, but somehow seemed more hopeful than the dark, angular ships of their enemies. "Who are they?" Veth asked. Nalith studied the display, and his old eyes began to fill with tears. "I think they are the answer to our prayers. Send a message to those ships. Tell them who we are and where we are hiding." Aboard the UES Defiance, Admiral Sullivan received the transmission from Elder Nalith. The Cathari leader's voice was weak but filled with gratitude. "Unknown friends, this is Elder Nalith of the Cathari people. We do not know who you are, but you have come when all others abandoned us. Our people are hiding in the deep ocean cities, but the Vorthak planet crackers will destroy us in less than 6 hours. If you are here to help us, we will guide you to our survivors." Admiral Sullivan felt her determination harden into steel. "Send a reply to Elder Nalith. Tell him we are humans from Earth and we have come to take his people to safety." The Admiral then opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan. You can see what we're facing. The enemy outnumbers us 3-1, and they have weapons that can destroy planets. Any ship that wants to withdraw can do so now with no shame." She waited, watching her tactical display. Not a single ship moved out of formation. "Very well then," the Admiral continued. "We didn't come here to fight a fair battle. We came here to save innocent people. Remember your training, trust your crews, and show these butchers what happens when they threaten people under humanity's protection." The Battle of Cathari Prime began when the human fleet split into 3 groups. Admiral Sullivan led the main battle group straight toward the center of the Vorthak formation. Captain Morrison took a smaller group of fast ships around the side. to attack the planet cracker weapons. The third group, led by Captain Pete Morgan in his converted mining ship, headed for the planet's surface to begin evacuations. The Vorthak commander, General Thex, watched the approaching human ships with amusement. Thex was a massive creature, even by Vorthak standards, with black armor that gleamed under the lights of his command ship. He had conquered 37 worlds and never lost a battle. Only 800 ships, Thex growled to his officers. These humans must be insane. Destroy them quickly so we can return to our work. But as the first shots were fired, General Thex began to realize that these humans were not like any enemy he had faced before. The human ships moved in patterns that made no sense according to military doctrine. They attacked in ways that should have been suicidal but somehow worked. Captain Morrison led his squadron of destroyers in a direct attack on the Vorthak flagship, the Eternal Conquest. Morrison's ship, the U.S. Liberty, weaved between enemy fire with impossible skill. The Liberty's weapons blazed as it closed the distance to the massive enemy vessel. "Sir," called out Lisa Harper from her communication station, "we're taking heavy damage to our port side." Morrison gripped his command chair as the ship shook from enemy fire. "Keep us moving, Lisa. If we stop, we're dead." The Liberty's hull was cracking under the strain, but Morrison pressed the attack. His ship fired everything it had at the Vorthak flagship, scoring direct hits on the enemy's weapon systems. On the planet's surface, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Davis led his Marines into the flooded cities where Cathari civilians were hiding. The Marines had modified their armor to work underwater, but fighting in an alien ocean was unlike anything they had trained for. "Marines, remember your mission," Frank called out over the communication system. "We're here to save people, not count kills. Get the civilians to the evacuation ships." The Marines moved through the underwater corridors of the Cathari cities, carrying aquatic stretchers loaded with injured civilians. Some of the Cathari were so weak they could barely swim. Others were wounded from falling debris or Vorthak weapons. Marine Bobby Clark, the 19-year-old who had asked about Vorthak weaknesses, found himself carrying a young Cathari child to safety. The child was unconscious and barely breathing. Bobby had never held an alien before, but the small being felt surprisingly fragile in his arms. "Hang on, little one," Bobby whispered as he swam toward the evacuation point. "We're going to get you out of here." Dr. Susan Blake worked frantically in the medical bay of the UES Mercy as wounded Cathari were brought aboard. She had converted the entire medical section into a series of water-filled treatment rooms. Human medics worked in diving gear to treat patients who needed to stay submerged. "Doctor," called out her assistant, Nancy Green, "we're running out of space. The injured keep coming." Susan looked around at the dozens of wounded Cathari filling her medical bay. Some had been burned by energy weapons. Others were suffering from poisoning caused by the polluted water. All of them looked at the human medical team with a mixture of hope and confusion. "Then we make more space," Susan replied. "Flood Cargo Bay 3 and set up additional treatment areas. No one dies because we don't have room." Above the planet, the space battle raged with incredible violence. Human ships darted between the massive Vorthak vessels like angry hornets, striking where the enemy was weakest and disappearing before they could be destroyed. Admiral Sullivan watched the battle from her command chair, coordinating the movements of 800 ships while missiles and energy beams filled the space around them. Her flagship, the Defiance, was taking heavy damage, but she refused to retreat. "Admiral," reported her tactical officer, "we've lost contact with 47 ships. The Vorthak are concentrating their fire on our evacuation vessels." Sullivan's face hardened with rage. The enemy was deliberately targeting the ships trying to save civilians. It was exactly the kind of evil that made her proud to be human and ashamed to share a galaxy with creatures like the Vorthak. "All remaining ships," she announced over the fleet channel, "protect the evacuation vessels at all costs. Every Cathari life we save is a victory they can never take away from us." The battle continued to rage as human ships sacrificed themselves to protect the rescue operation. But slowly, steadily, Cathari survivors were being pulled from their dying world and carried to safety in the holds of human vessels.